Hare Krishna. So, welcome everyone. Humble obeisances to all the devotees. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivas Adi Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Hare Krishna. So we are continuing the last part of the second chapter of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we have discussed the main sections of the Bhagavatam of the second chapter. We started off by discussing how Suta Goswami, after he had been asked those 6 questions, he first offers his obeisances to Sukdev Goswami. He glorifies Sukdev Goswami. And after the glorification of Sukdev Goswami, then he also offers obeisances to Lord Narayan, who's the subject of the Srimad Bhagavatam, to Narayan Rishi, the goddess Saraswati, Vyasadeva, and he glorifies that your questions are very excellent. Why? Because it will benefit all lokas, everyone, like all the people will be benefited by your questions. And your questions are pertaining to Krishna, and hence they are perfect and they'll give satisfaction to the self. Yenatma suprasidati. Then the next section we discussed was basically how the answers to question 1 and 2 have been given. So question 1 and 2, what is the ultimate good for people in general? And second, what is the essence of all the Shastras? And the answer to both the questions is actually bhakti. Savai pumsa parodharma yato bhaktir adokshate ahituki apratiyata yayatma suprasidati. Right? And so the highest dharma is ahituki apratihata devotional service. The devotional service having these two qualities. And then also we talked about the Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janati Asuvairagam Jnanam Chayat Ahitukam, that by practicing bhakti, jnanam and vairagya. So these two things, knowledge and detachment, are byproducts of that bhakti. And what was varnashram? So the next section was talking about varnashram. And basically in varnashram it was pointed out that varnashram, if it is not na utpade yadi ratim shama evahi kevalam, if your activities of your varna and ashrama are not leading to awakening of no utpade yadi ratim, attraction to Vishwaksena Kathasvaya, to actually message of Krishna or Vishwaksena, then that is actually Shrama Evaikam. This is like useless labor. So this actually shows the level of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that the Bhagavatam is actually giving the highest conclusion. Different scriptures talk about the glories of performing the duties as a Brahmana, Kshatriya, all our Varnashram duties, and the worship of demigods, all those things. But Bhagavatam is saying nothing doing. We are just going to talk of the highest, right? And that is devotional service. Right? Okay. Then, and then that entire section was talking about Varnashram, and then Varnashram, all our duties should be done for one main thing. Samsiddhir Haritoshan. Everything we do should be done for the pleasure of Krishna. So when we are doing our duties of a Varna and Ashrama, our job or our Grahastha ashram duties and so on, we always think, why are we doing this? Just for the pleasure of Krishna, right? So that is always on our mind. We are doing this for Samsiddhir Haritoshan, right? Okay. Then the next section was the process of bhakti. So this second chapter is so beautiful because it has not only said what is finally our goal. Our goal is pure devotional service. And then it has talked of who is the object of our worship, right? And that's what we'll be discussing today. And it's also talked of the process of that devotional service. So the process is the next section, starting from text number 16. Right, so we go, all the famous verses are there, like Shrinatam Swakata Krishna, Nashtaprayashu, Abhadreshu, and we discussed that as all these 9 processes of devotional service, starting Shraddha, Sadhusanga, Bhajan, Kriya, Anartha Nivriti, Nishta, Ruchi, Ashakti, Bhav, and Prem. Right? And we also discuss how Chakravarti Pad actually expands this into 14, saying that the first one is actually kripa, right? The Vaishnava kripa, like to actually get the mercy, and then it starts in Mahat Seva and so on, right? So he expands in that way. So we discussed that section, and it's beautiful that how another important point is whenever these points are established, like in the previous section when Bhakti is pointed as the highest, then he concludes by saying, Tasmad Ekena Manasa, hence we should actually one pointed just hear, glorify, worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then he actually said, then who will not hear this message, which is so glorious, just by hearing, one actually can cut off the hard knot in our heart and Chindandi Kovidastasya Kona Kurya Katha. Who will not hear these messages? Okay. And then Bhakti actually also in the Bhakti section, he concludes by saying, Atho vai kavayo nityam bhaktim paramaya muda. Hence, Atho vai kavayo nityam, from a long time, people have been engaging in devotional service, and how muda, with great joy, people are actually engaging in devotional service. Right? Okay, so we stopped at 22. The next sections are actually relatively easier in the sense like purports are straightforward, and just encourage once you read, you will get a good understanding. But just to get a quick overview, so we'll start off with 23. Sattvam rajastama iti prakritir gunestir yukta para purusha eka ihasya datte sitya adhaya harivinchi hareti sangya shreyamsa tatra khalo sattva tano nirnamsyu. So Hari Virinchi Hareti. So here I'll read the translation first. The transcendental personality of Godhead is indirectly associated with the three modes of material nature. So the important point is indirectly associated, right? So the supreme personality of Godhead, he never comes directly in contact with the three modes of material nature, but indirectly. And how? We'll read later on how it is through the glance of the Lord, and the Lord does not directly come in contact. And we also know this, which will be discussed later, that how when he glances, that glance, which is actually carried by the Lord's own consort, Rama Devi, when it comes in contact with material nature, then it actually becomes Shambhu or Shiva, Lord Shiva. Right? So the Lord is indirectly associated with three modes of material nature, namely passion, goodness, and ignorance. And just for the material world's creation, maintenance, and destruction, he accepts the three qualitative forms, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Just for the material world's creation, maintenance, and destruction. Right? Creation, Brahma, maintenance, Vishnu, and Shiva is destruction. Of these three, all human beings can derive the ultimate benefit. So Shreyamsi, that word is there, Shreya. So we know Shreyas and Preyas. Right? So Shreyas is long term, the ultimate benefit. How one can derive by worshipping Vishnu. So all these three forms, one actually by worshipping Vishnu, one can actually derive the highest benefit. Right? Shreyamsi. So the form of the quality of goodness. Right? So the word indirectly is very important. And the purport Prabhupada actually starts off by explaining, starting from Krishna, how Krishna's first expansion is Balaram. From Balaram, there is the first Chaturvya, Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. From that Sankarshan, there is Narayan, right? And from Narayan, there is second Chaturvya, again Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Vasudev. And from that Sankarshan is actually the three Purusha avatars. Like Karandakshay Vishnu, Shirodakshay Vishnu, and Garbhodakshay Vishnu. So Prabhupada explains that entire section as the first part of the purport and makes the point that these Purusha avatars, right, all these three, they are actually coming from Sankarsha, of the secondary Chaturvya. Okay, and then Prabhupada points out, he talks of how Shirodakshay Vishnu is the Paramatma in the heart of every living entity. And the main theme of this purport is that Brahma and Shiva, Brahma is controlling the mode of passion, Shiva is controlling the mode of ignorance. But these two personalities, they actually, when they actually come in contact, though they are controllers, so they come in contact with the modes. But Lord Vishnu does not directly come in contact with the material modes of nature. So Prabhupada in the purport also makes the point that the Lord actually expands as integrated forms and separated forms. The integrated forms are his own Vishnu Tattva expansion, and the separated forms are the Jiva Tattva expansion. And then he actually says there is a difference between the separated forms and the integrated forms. Right? Jiva Tattva and Vishnu Tattva, they can never be Jiva Tattva can never become Vishnu Tattva, right? So he makes a point how the Jiva Tattva, we actually come into this material world with the intention of being the Lord, but then we get entrapped in this material nature, right? And hence we are actually, one way we are put in the prison house of the material world. And Prabhupada makes a point, the prison house is actually created by Brahma. And if one actually wants to get some better facilities of the prison house, like the prisoners in the prison house, they say like, okay, this room is there, I'm in this room, but can I have a little better food, or can I have a little better bed to sleep on, or things like that? But still, he's in a prison house. So if the person, the prisoner, is interested in getting better relative facilities, then he can actually approach the different demigods. But the ultimate benefit of getting liberation from the prison house, that can only be given by Vishnu, right? And also Prabhupada goes like Hiranyakashipu, he did all these austerities and he asked Brahma, please make me immortal. But Brahma said, I myself am not immortal. So even Brahma and Shiva cannot give that aspect of liberation, which is actually the Shreyamsi, the ultimate benefit. So, so Prabhupada is pointing out, like repeatedly coming to a point there, why why Vishnu? Worshipping Vishnu is actually the highest, the ultimate benefit. And also Chakravarti Pal makes a point that how the bodies of Brahma and Shiva, right, because they accept the bodies of Rajas and Tamas, and sometimes they actually get influenced by the modes, because if you're controlling the modes so closely, then there is a chance that these two personalities can get influenced. But Vishnu is always transcendental, right? Okay, so that is 23. Let's move on to 24. Now, having talked of how the Lord accepts these three modes for the purpose of creation, maintenance, destruction, now an example is there. Parthiva dharuno dhuma tasmad agnistrai maya tamasastu rajastasmad sattvam yad brahmadarshanam. Firewood is a transformation of earth, but smoke is better than raw wood. Fire is still better, for by fire we can derive the benefits of superior knowledge through Vedic sacrifices. Similarly, passion is better than ignorance, but goodness is the best, because by goodness one can come to realize the absolute truth. So again, having made the point of Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, is actually saying, giving the example how Vishnu is the highest. Worshipping, worship of Vishnu is actually the best, and he gives the example. So that firewood, there is smoke, and there is fire. Right? So firewood actually has fire inside, right? But it is dormant. Right? It's dormant. Smoke, there is more activity there. Like you can see, you can feel some heat from the smoke, right? So some effect is there. But fire is the best. Why? Because with fire you can actually do Vedic sacrifices, right? You can actually gain superior knowledge through Vedic sacrifices by the fire. So these three, firewood, the smoke, and the fire, are compared to the three modes of material nature. And certainly the fire is the best, because by fire we can actually perform Vedic sacrifices. And the point is, actually, these three are actually transformations of each other. Like the firewood can be burned, and then you get smoke, and then you get fire, right? So how even Brahma Samhita makes a point, Shiram Yathata Divikar Vishesha Yoga Sanjayate Nahi Pratagahe Asti Hetu. So these three, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, are actually considered as qualitative incarnations of Krishna, right? They are in charge. So they are also considered incarnations in that way. So, right, so that point is made. Okay. So, right, and Prabhupada and Purport actually makes a point that one has to rise to the platform of the mode of goodness, sattva, in order to be eligible to come in order to be eligible for the devotional service of the Lord. And then Prabhupada makes a point that the spiritual master is competent to actually take a disciple from any stage, whether it's tamas, rajas, or sattva, to actually a state of goodness and then beyond. Right? That is a spiritual master has that qualities that wherever the disciple is, you can actually take him to the highest platform. Okay. Text 25. Bejire munairotagre bhagwan tamadokshagam sattvam vishuddham shemaya kalpante yenutan iha. Previously, all the great saints rendered service unto the personality of God due to his existence above the three modes of material nature. So again, like whenever the points are made, okay, bhakti is the highest example. Then here, worship of Vishnu is the highest benefit. Example. So here it said previously, all the great sages, Bhejare Muniyo Tyage. Muniyo means all the sages have previously actually worshipped who? Bhagavantam Adokshajam. Again, Adokshajam, we discussed this word before also, right? It comes in Savai Pumsam Parv Dharma. So Bhakti Adokshajam. So same Adokshajam is here. Sattvam Vishuddham Sevaya. So he's actually beyond his existence, the Sattvam existence, is Vishuddham, above the three modes of material nature. And Shemaya, again, the ultimate benefit. So great sages have rendered service unto the personality of God due to his existence above the three modes. And by worshipping him, they become free from material conditions and they derive the ultimate benefit. Whoever follows such great authorities, right? The last line actually says, Kalpante ye nutan iha. Anu, we see this word anu come. Anu means to follow in the footsteps. So anyone who follows in the footsteps of these great sages who have performed devotional service to Vishnu will also be eligible for liberation from this material world. Right? Tan iha, you can actually go beyond this material world. And Prabhupada in the purport actually makes a point about following the Mahajans. Our process is Mahajano Yena Gatasa Pantha. Right? We follow in the footsteps of Mahajans. And sixth canto, in the conversation between Yamaraj and Yamadutas, he actually points out that 12 Mahajans, right? Swayambhu, Narada, Shambhu, Kumaro, Kapila, Manu, and so on. These 12 Mahajans are mentioned. And he said, like, these 12 Mahajans, they know what is the purpose of religion, and we follow in their footsteps. And in that way, we can also derive the supreme, the ultimate benefit. Right? So persons who desire their own good may follow this Mahajan and thus attain the supreme benefit. Okay. 26. Mumuksho Ghora Rupan Hitwa Bhuta Patin Atha Narayana Kalashanta Bhajanti Hi Anasuyavaha. Those who are serious about liberation are certainly non-universal and they respect all. So the point is actually made. So 26, right? Yeah. So the point is when they respect all. Yeah. Yet they reject the horrible and ghastly forms of the demigods and worship only the all blissful forms of Lord Vishnu and his plenary portion. So 26 and 27 is actually pointing out the worship of demigods. Like in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has made the point, right? He's actually point men who have lost their intelligence due to material desires, they actually worship the demigods, right? So that point is made in Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 7 and chapter 9, right? Text 21, 22, and also in chapter 9, 19, 20, 21. Same points are made that how the worship of demigod, that is actually, Krishna is not recommending that part, right? So here also same point is made that, yes, those who are serious about liberation, right? So mumukshavaha means persons who are desiring liberation, right? They actually, they do not worship all these demigods, but what is their mood towards them? They still respect everyone. Why? Because they are anasuyavaha. Even Krishna uses this word to describe Arjuna. Anasuyavaha means non-envious. Because you're non-envious, we don't actually disrespect them. Demigods are there. Yes, you have been appointed by Krishna. You are empowered to do certain acts of managing this material universe. So certainly you are glorious. We offer our respects to you, but our heart goes only to Vishnu or Krishna. Right. So in 26, and also it points out that they reject the horrible and ghastly forms of the demigods. Right? So Prabhupada actually points out that how there are the forms of Kala Bhairav and some Smashana Bhairav and Shani, Mahakali, Chandika. Right? So all these are like ghastly forms of the demigod. And Prabhupada points out that those are in mode of ignorance, they worship these kinds of personalities. Those are a little bit in mode of passion, then they worship Brahma, Shiva, Surya, Ganesh, and so on, right? But those are in a mode of goodness, they worship only Vishnu. But the main point here is respect for all. Right? It's not that as devotees of the Lord, you would disrespect anyone. Like Prabhupada makes point, you won't even disrespect an ant. So what to talk about these elevated demigods? So in the purport, it says, highly qualified brahmanas situated in a mode of goodness have no grudges against those who are worshipping. They say like, well, they are in that particular mode and they are following that mode. So yes, we don't have grudge against them, but yes, if we can bring them somehow to the mode of, to their ultimate benefit, then we will help them. but we don't have any grudge against them. So that point is set. And Prabhupada also points out that one who actually equates the worship of demigods to that of worship of Vishnu is actually a Pasha. Okay, and then text 27. Rajastama prakritya shama shila bhajanti va pitra bhuta praje shadin shriyashwarya prajip savaha. Okay, so we see the last line. Shriya means beauty or enrichment, Aishwarya, wealth, power, praja, progeny, good children, and so on. Ipsava. So those who are desiring these kind of material benefits, then they worship the demigods. Right? So those who are in the modes of passion and ignorance, they worship those in the same category, namely the forefathers, pitras, other living beings, demigods who are in charge of cosmic activities, for they are urged by a desire to be materially benefited with woman, wealth, power, and progeny. Okay, so that's 27. Right. And Prabhupada in the purport points out that material enjoyment should be accepted only up to the point of bare necessities of life. And this goes back to our section of Varnashram in this chapter, right, where it says like, one should jiveta yavata, just for self-preservation, whatever comes, we accept that. The same point Prabhupada made. Material enjoyment can be accepted only up to bare necessities of life, not more, nor less than that. Right? And he actually makes a point, if we are worshipping demigods to actually get material benefit, then we are actually simply increasing our attachment to this material world. So we are actually increasing the disease in one way. But our whole point is to get free from this material entanglement and actually go back home, back to God. So Prabhupada says the aim of life is to end the miseries of life and not to increase them. Right? And then worship of demigods, getting more wealth, more woman, beauty, power, all those things is just going to increase our misery. And hence Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying Bhagavatam is just, it is dharma projita kaitava. It's not like it's rejecting all the kaitava dharma, bringing one to the highest platform of devotional service. Okay, so 28, 29 will conclude this section of how the object of worship is Krishna. The process of worship is bhakti, the object of worship is Krishna, and what are the different steps in bhakti that we described, right? Vasudeva para Veda, Vasudeva para Maka, Vasudeva para Yoga, Vasudeva para Kriha, Vasudeva param Jnanam, Vasudeva param Tapaha, Vasudeva paro Dharma, Vasudeva para Gatihi. Right? So basically, it's straightforward. Vasudeva para Veda. That means what? The ultimate knowledge, object of knowledge of all the Vedas is who? Vasudeva. Vasudeva para Makaha. Makaha means sacrifices. Who is the object of all the sacrifices? Is Yageshwara, is actually Vasudeva, right? Vasudeva para Yoga, all the yoga processes. Why are we doing yoga? Finally, the goal is to realize Vasudeva. Vasudeva para Kriyaha. Kriya means fruitive activities. So all our activities, whatever we are doing, the results are only given by Vasudeva. Vasudeva param Jnanam, by all the knowledge, he is to be known, right? Vedasa sarver aham eva vedya. And he is actually the supreme knowledge. Vasudeva Parantapaha, of all austerities are performed just to know Vasudeva. Vasudeva Parodharma, again, Parodharma, the word has come, right? So Parodharma, the highest dharma is to actually serve Vasudeva or reconnect with Vasudeva. Our purpose is rendering loving service unto Vasudeva. And Vasudeva Paragatihi, he is the supreme goal of life. So Prabhupada in the purport, like every paragraph is actually going through each one of these points and actually elaborating. So it's a little long purport, but it's each point has been explained. So like how Prabhupada is talking about of all sacrifices, another name of Vasudeva is Yagya. So in Bhagavad Gita it's clearly stated that all sacrifices, all activities are to be conducted for the satisfaction of Yagya or Vishnu. Right? Yagyarto karmano anyatra lokoyam karma bandhana. And also Prabhupada and the different aspects of yoga, asana, dhyan, pranayam is finally to come upon meditation on Paramatma, actually Vasudeva in the heart, in the core of the heart. And in Bhagavad Gita, 18 items of cultural knowledge are given. It starts off with amanitvam, adamvitvam, and so on. Right? And the entire purpose of all that knowledge is to bring one to Vasudeva, tapasya, like all the austerities, is actually to, like Prabhupada gives the example of Ravan and Hiranyakashipu. They perform severe types of body torture to achieve the end of sense gratification. All these different austerities are performed, but what is the result of all their austerities? They're just vanquished. Right? So the only true austerity is actually to come to Lord Shri Krishna. And Prabhupada gives the example of how Vasudeva and Devaki, they perform austerity. But for what? They wanted to have a son like Krishna. And because there's no one like Krishna, Krishna himself became their son. So that is the real austerity. Right? And yeah, so purpose is straightforward. Next. Okay, so up to this 28, 29, Krishna has been pointed as the object of our worship. Right? So yeah, Bhagavan Krishna is pointed out, Vasudeva is pointed as topmost object of worship is established in this section. Okay. In the last section, 32, 34. So now in this section, one question is the question number 4 was about Purusha Avatar. So very briefly, the Purusha Avatars are just mentioned here. We won't go into too much detail because Bhagavatam goes into elaborate details. As we proceed through Bhagavatam, we'll be discussing this in more detail. And the last question, in Subodhini, it says that the last question is actually answering that why Krishna actually appears in this material world. So a hint is given. So very briefly, 4 verses are talking about this section. So we'll just quickly cover. So text 30. Sa evadam Sa evadam sasarjagre Bhagwan Atma Mayaya Sad Asad Rupaya Chasho Guna Maya Guno Vibhuhu. In the beginning of material creation, that absolute Vasudeva, so having established Vasudeva as a worship, as a goal of worship, the object of worship, now he's saying that same Vasudeva in his transcendental position, Atma Maya, right? Even in Bhagavad Gita we read this word, Atma Maya, 4th chapter, right? Created the energies of cause and effect by his own energy, own internal energy, Atma Maya. Sat Asad Rupaya Chashu. He's created this whole created energies of cause and effect. So this is actually referring to Karana Raksha Vishnu. So of the Purusha avatars, the first one is Karana Raksha Vishnu, who's lying on the causal ocean, and by his breathing, all these actually universes come into existence. So he's actually a cause, and the effect, the energy is also coming from him itself. So Prabhupada is a short purport here. 31. Taya vilasiteshu eshu guneshu gunavan iha anta pravishta abhati vijnanena vijrambitaha. After creating the material substance as the Mahat Tattva, right, first the Pradhan and then the Mahat Tattva, the Lord Vasudeva expands himself and enters into it. So when all the material universes come into existence, right, like a bubble, then the Lord Karanaksha Vishnu enters into each one and fills half of that bubble with his own sweat, and then he lies on the water on Ananta Shesh, right? So that is actually Garbhodaksha Vishnu, and then that Garbhodaksha Vishnu he expands as Shirodaksha Vishnu, right? So both Garbhodaksha and Shirodaksha are actually mentioned in this verse. Like expands himself and enters into it. So that is Garbhodaksha Vishnu. And although he is within the material modes of nature and appears to be one of the created beings, so it is Shirodaksha Vishnu who actually appears as different avatars. He is always fully enlightened. So though he may come as Lord Ramchandra, and it may appear that he is, lamenting for his wife who has been kidnapped and so on, but he is always fully enlightened. He's always in transcendental position. So what all we see, the activities of the Lord, they are only his lila, right? Okay. So that is text 31. Okay. 32. Yata hi avahito vanir daru swa ekaswa yonishu naneva bhati vishvatma bhuteshu cha tatha puman. The Lord as super soul pervades all things. So this Shirodaksha Vishnu, he expands as the super soul in the heart of all living beings, and also he enters into each atom. So he pervades everything, right? That's Shirodaksha Vishnu, just as fire permeates wood, right? So in wood, there is fire. Like you cannot see it, but the fire is present. As soon as you rub two wood together, the fire comes up, right? So he appears to be many varieties, though he is the absolute one without second. So though the Lord as Shirodaksha Vishnu, he is pervading everything, yet he is actually the absolute one without the second. So he's not uh, he's not affected by all these transformations. Right? So similar point is made in the previous verse also, where it says always fully enlightened in transcendental position, and here he's saying he's the absolute one without a second. So though he actually becomes a part of this relative world, he's still one without a second. Okay, and then purport Prabhupada points out 32 purport. Yeah, Prabhupada makes a point that as from wood fire can be manifested, or from as butter can be churned out of milk, so also the presence of the Lord as Paramatma can be felt by the process of legitimate hearing and chanting of the transcendental subject. So when we actually hear and chant, then we can perceive the presence of Paramatma everywhere, all over. We can see how Krishna is actually, everything that we see is actually Krishna's own energy. It is all Krishna's manifestation. Right? And then Prabhupada makes another wonderful point. He says, as fire is kindled from wood by another fire, right? The divine consciousness of man can similarly be kindled by another divine grace. So this goes back to our point where we said bhakti is ahituki. And bhakti comes only from a bhakta. Right? So Prabhupada in one sentence actually making the point that the fire is kindled from wood by another fire. Right? Fire is there, you take it and put it on another wood. So fire is there inside, but it is actually, it lights up. Right? Similarly, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhyakamana. That bhakti is there in our heart, but when another devotee who has the bhakti comes in contact with us and out of his mercy gives us that bhakti, then a bhakti which is actually there in the core of our heart, that gets awakened. Okay, similarly, be kindled by another divine grace. His divine grace, the spiritual master, can kindle the spiritual fire from the wood-like living entity by imparting proper spiritual messages injected through the receptive ear. Beautiful sentences, two sentences. His divine grace, we call Prabhupada, his divine grace, manifestation of Krishna's own mercy. The spiritual master can kindle the spiritual fire from the wood-like living entity. So, yeah, like wood-like. But that is that spiritual fire inside. So the spiritual master knows how to bring out that bhakti in the core of our heart. How? By imparting proper spiritual messages injected through the receptive ear. Everything is there in this sentence. Receptive ear, then the spiritual master gives a message, and bhakti, which is in the core of heart, that is actually pure. The text 33. असो गुणमयीर्भावैर् भूता सूक्ष्मेन्द्रियात्मभिः स्वनिर्मितेषु निर्विष्टो भुङ्क्ते भूतेषु तद्गुणान्. The super soul enters into the bodies of the created beings who are influenced by the modes of material nature and causes them to enjoy the effects of these modes by the subtle mind. So it is actually Paramatma in the heart, right? So in Bhagavad Gita, we have read this concept that how the Paramatma, he just like how if a rose is close by, you can smell the fragrance of the rose. Similarly, the Paramatma seated next to us, next to the Atma, he actually, just like the rose fragrance can be smelled, the Paramatma can perceive the desires of the living entity, and based on desire, he controls the three modes of material nature, and through the subtle mind, makes us work in such a way that we can try to fulfill those desires. But it's all the working of the Paramatma. Right. So Prabhupada and purpose says the Lord as Paramatma helps the living being to get material happiness because the living being is helpless in all respects in obtaining what is there. So even though we have turned away from Krishna, even though we want to enjoy separate from Krishna, or even though there are people who say there's no Krishna, there's no God, even they are helpless to even enjoy material nature. The super soul has to, through the three modes of material nature, control them so they can actually fulfill their desires which are separate from Krishna. Imagine how merciful Krishna is. That even though we have turned away, he's like, okay, he's away. Let him actually, he wants to try to enjoy. Okay, I will provide all facilities. I'll make the arrangement. I'll make him enjoy through his subtle mind, right? Causes them to enjoy the effects of these modes by the subtle mind. So it's all Paramatma, which is Krishna in the Purapata. And text 34, the last verse here. So, Bhava yatya esha satvena lokan vailoka bhavana lila avatara Nurato Deva Tirya Naradishu. Thus, the Lord of the universes maintains all planets inhabited by demigods, men, and lower beings. So he maintains, right? So this is actually Vishnu, assuming the roles of incarnation, that is Leela avatars, right? So Leela avatars, like we mentioned that point, Leela Avatar, he performs pastimes to reclaim those in the mode of goodness. So Leela Avatars, the third question was, why did Krishna actually appear in the womb of Devaki as the son of Vasudeva, right? So when here is referring to Leela Avatar, one way the explanation Subodhini gives, and Chakravarti Pad actually makes a point that he says, this is explaining the answer, at least a hint to the third question, why Krishna appears in the womb of Devaki. He comes just to reclaim those in the mode of pure goodness. All right. So Prabhupada says in the purpose, sometimes he incarnates himself or empowers a suitable living entity to act for him. But in either case, the purpose is the same. So why does the Lord actually appear? Only one purpose. The Lord wants the suffering living beings to go back home, back to God. Right. So this goes back to a point, and this theme, this chapter repeatedly Prabhupada is making the theme about, are we really anxious to go back to God? The Lord is more eager to take us back to God, but do we have that desire to go back to God? And we read that if you have the desire, then Krishna actually helps us in all respects. And when Krishna helps us, the process becomes as easy as anything. Right? So we read that in the purport. So we'll stop here. ग्रंथा श्रीमद् भागवताम की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय, वंशकल्पतरुभ्यस्य कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः. Thank you all so much. Hare Krishna.